Welcome back to the Now What Podcast, greatest podcast on earth. My name is Arian Foster, a.k.a. Bobby Feeno, a.k.a. the Pod God. I like that. I think I'm going to go with that.
Is that a new one?
Yep.
All right.
I think I just did it. So
hope it catches on.
Y'all let me know if y'all will rock the Pod God t-shirts because I think I like that name. But anyway, we have another special guest in the building. This one is real special because it's my kinfolk, literally. This is my sister, Christina Foster.
That is I. Yes.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think we can have an immensely great conversation because we come from the same cloth.
Definitely.
Via the same penis and vagina. We came out of the same womb. But we have very similar and very different ideologies.
Yes.
We've had many talks over the years, and given your expertise and given my awesomeness, I think we can have an interesting conversation, man. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
For sure, man. So I want to give the people a little bit of your background.
Okay.
So I will butcher your.
You do every time.
Yeah,
every time.
The decor of what you have accomplished in your life. I'll butcher it. So if you can be so kind as to list your compliments, not compliments, your accomplishments. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just to kind of wrap everything up, I am an activist. Do a lot of different activist work in different areas, different forums. I'm an educator, and I love history. I'm a lover of history. So that's pursued me to go get degrees. I got a few of those, and my last one was my master's degree, and it's a really complicated title. Intercultural Service Leadership and Management, which just is social justice and education. Social justice and education.
Yep. And you got a master's in that?
Yes.
And a minor in history?
So masters, you don't really do minors, just kind of...
Oh, see, I don't even know enough about
focus.
that.
But in undergrad, I did do a psychology history double with an Africana studies minor.
Got you.
Yeah.
That's a lot of school.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have the patience.
It's a discipline.
Yeah, it's definitely a discipline, man. So salute to you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm not done either.
You're gonna get
a PhD.
You're gonna get a PhD.
Actually, been researching that. Here in Atlanta, where I stay now, found a couple of programs I'm really interested in.
All right.
And hopefully keep the research.
What is that? Is it like 2 years, 4 years?
Well, it's really usually depends on you, the person.
Right.
But most programs, if you're doing them consistently, about 3 to 4 years.
3 to 4 years.
I know a guy that did his, but he was
grinding.
He didn't have no kids, no anything, and he was very young, and he did his in 3 years. But that's very, very. Most people who have PhDs have kids, families, they have other jobs.
Right. Shit to do.
Yeah, so it's usually about a 4 to 5 year process.
4 to 5 year process.
Yeah.
I want to go pursue a higher education.
Yeah.
But it's just so time consuming.
It is.
And the issue I have with education in general is that you can't ever focus on your field of study until you're already out of the undergrad.
Well,
you have prerequisites you have to have.
I definitely think it depends on what your area is. So like for me, in undergrad, I was doing psychology, history.
Right.
I know that at the time,
like, you have to get electives and shit like that.
Yeah,
that's like shit like that. Like, why the fuck do I have? Like, why?
But all my electives. So again, this is what I love about college because it kind of really exposes you to so many different areas. And actually, I didn't go into college having anything to do with Africana studies, but I took some Africana studies electives,
right?
And then that ended up being kind of a course of study that I was really interested in, so I kind of weaved it into what I was doing. But that's one of the things that I love about college is that it really exposes you. So for a lot of the social sciences, you actually can kind of move in some of those areas without having, your credentials yet. So I knew that I wanted to do activism work. I really didn't know what that was. I think at the time I didn't have a vocabulary for it.
Right.
I just knew what I was interested in as I kind of grew. Probably within 2 years, I started implementing a lot of things actually on the college campus. We started working and doing things, creating clubs and things that were creating change within the scene on the college campus.
Right. And so that's kind of what I want to get into is kind of like how you became and how your interests sparked in becoming an advocate for activism in the Black community?
Well, to start, I mean, we grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I tell people that at the time when we were growing up, it was actually probably way more segregated than it is now.
Definitely was.
You remember, like, the side of town we used to live on. Like, if you went outside of that, it was very rare to see any Black people on any other side of town. And we really didn't travel outside of that town. And Albuquerque is actually a really small city, so it's kind of weird when I think back to it.
I think a lot of cities are like that, actually. A lot of cities are segregated.
We are far less, as a population, we are far less integrated than we would like to believe.
Yeah.
And so growing up, a lot of these ideologies, I would say that were things that our dad taught us.
Right.
He kind of gave us a really good, I think, understanding of what it was to grow up in a world looking Black, basically. And so for me, I was always very fascinated by it. I think as a kid, there was definitely things I can recall as a child where I was for lack of a better word, targeted because I was Black, like in school and things like that. And I always had a desire to stand up. I remember when we watched Roots had came on when we were a kid, the TV show. It's so bad now when I watched it as an adult. But it was like fascinating as a kid. And then I remember going to school and I got in trouble because I was like angry at everybody. Like, why aren't you guys as upset as I am? And don't you feel bad about what happened? And that I think it's kind of always been in me. I just didn't know what I was doing. And then as I grew and I became adult, I became far less interested in those types of things. And when I went to school, I actually went to school initially to be a lawyer.
I'm glad you didn't do that.
Yeah, and I got in there and I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. And
I
then
don't really like lawyers. I mean, shout out to the lawyers that are good lawyers.
Yeah.
But I think it's just when you turn justice into a business, it's diluted. So
very.
But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and
my disdain for the law.
That's kind of where I think what it was is that I just, as I kind of got into it, I was like, this isn't actually justice. It's kind of who can talk the best talking points about interpret something their way the best. And so it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was truly doing a service for anybody.
Right.
And so then I actually became interested in counseling because it was just like help people counseling. I don't know why that connection was made.
Counselors help people.
Yeah. And so, but then eventually I had got asked during undergrad to do a couple of presentations. And the one that kind of drew the passion out of me was somebody came up to me and they were like, I need you to, for this really big crowd that's coming in of kids and their parents, and we need to highlight the center I was working at the time, which is African American Student Services. So they said, we need somebody that can talk about Black history in 5 minutes in America. And I was like, who can do that?
Yeah, right.
Like, that's impossible. And but they were like, yeah, well, we think you could do it. So good luck with that. And just kind of left me, and I was able to do it. I got a really good feedback from the crowd, and they were really engaged. And that moment was kind of what sparked for me. That was like, I actually can do this, and I know what I'm talking about. And not only that I was actually sometimes very, very, very passionate about. Right. So kind of just blazed the path from there.
No, you did. I've had a lot of admiration for your work. You've done a lot of work, and you've done a lot of things to help change the narrative in people's eyes that otherwise would not have done so. And so I definitely commend you for that.
Thank you.
We live in an interesting time in America, though.
Yeah.
Where, we talk about a lot on this podcast of race relations and things of that sort. Being an activist in today's world is and this is what I always think about when I think about, do people because the narrative like we hold like of Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or Marcus Garvey today is with a lot of this reverence, right? But during that time, did people hold that same reverence for them? Or was there people like, they're just complaining, or they're just this, or they're just that?
Definitely, without a doubt. And speaking specifically to the Black community, I've actually read and seen documentaries for Brother Malcolm, for Dr. King, that, closer towards the time of their death, like people weren't. So you get people now that were like, I marched with Dr. King. And in reality, so many people were afraid, number one. And number two, actually, a lot of people were against things that he was doing because he was rocking the boat. And same thing for Malcolm X. He's rocking the boat and people didn't want to do that. It's hard for people to really step outside of their comfort zone, right? Especially when the consequence could potentially be your life. So people don't. Right. And then like in Marcus Garvey's case, surely like the people actually that kind of did him in were Black people. Right. So
because his whole thing was like, let's go back to Africa.
Well, that was a part of it. Marcus Garvey, he's by far one of my most one of my most favorite people, and one of the people I study. I actually kind of follow more along in his philosophies than anybody else's. And Marcus Garvey, part of his philosophy was let's go back to Africa. Right. But it was so much more than that. And he created so many programs. I mean, he had a magazine, and he was building companies. He was trying to start banking businesses to kind of distribute wealth amongst Black communities throughout the diaspora. So it wasn't even just about America. I mean, he was Jamaican, you know, and so he really believed in this concept and this ideology of, Black people throughout the diaspora were one. And so in order for us to get to a platform, we have to really move as one and act as one, and not everything, but a lot of things.
So I mean, you get drawback when you say this, right? But I believe this, that desegregation in America was actually detrimental to the Black community.
I say that all the time.
It was awful.
It was awful.
And when you say that to like white folks who don't understand the baseline of what you're trying to say, it sounds almost it's just like, what do you mean? Like, because here you had leaders in civil rights movements that fought and died for the rights to basically live in the same society as white folks. Right. But it killed our economic wealth. So if you could dig into that a little bit, because when I say that to people, like it's like a shock. You get a shock value from them.
Definitely.
But in a large way, I think desegregation was not a positive for Black people.
It wasn't. And so kind of the way I always frame it is this. So when you go to counseling, right, and you do individual therapy, one of the things that they kind of teach you, however they frame it, is that you cannot be good to anybody else if you yourself are not whole. And so for the Black people in this country, at that time, people have to understand and take things into a time context. And so we were out of slavery not even 100 years. And then we went through this almost 100 years of Jim Crow apartheid, where who and what we are was defined by everybody else but us. And so one thing that we were able to do and do successfully in that time was to create businesses and education systems and things that allowed us to define who we are. And so the Black dollar, particularly, which is so important, was able to circulate during that time at a faster pace. Because we were forced to in the Black community, because we were forced to. You weren't allowed to shop at white businesses or go outside of those places. So it put us in a position where we were forced to do for self. And so that aspect of it alone was completely beneficial. And that was probably I would argue, a time for Black people where we really were in charge of who we were. Now, the only drawback to that, obviously, was the white terrorism that was taking place. And you can't discount that.
It's such a it almost, it's, when you say, it's so funny, when you say white terrorism, there's a part of me that's like, that's an oxymoron, just because of the branding of terrorism. That's insane.
And in reality, we talk about this, or I've talked about this, on countless occasions. The amount, when we look at domestic terrorism, it has been white communities, or white people, particularly white men, and
they're extremely reluctant to label it terrorism.
Yes. And there's not the same accountability that has to be held to ending the terror. Really is what it is. So you can't tell me that somebody going and putting on a bomb and going and standing in a place full of people is not equally as bad as dragging people out of their homes and lynching them.
Right.
You know, and so it's terrorism. It's terrorism. Like, we can't level the killing and murdering of people, but we do that very often, and particularly with Black people. We, you know, there's this term I like to use, where anti-Blackness, and it's where Black people's bodies and life are concerned. We have learned throughout this society to devalue them.
Right.
And so we don't look at that with the same impact that we do other people's violence or death and bodies.
I want you to explain to me, or not necessarily to me, because I would just be playing devil's advocate, because I am a proponent of this. But explain to somebody who's playing devil's advocate, or somebody out there who disagrees, that focusing on race in today's society is not only productive, but it's necessary.
Right. And so for me,
just for a little context, because a lot of what you hear in today's rhetoric, especially from the opposition, is that we live in a post-racist society. It's time to start building from that. And I think that is backwards thinking. But if
not only is it backwards thinking, it's factually inaccurate. We're not in a post-racial society. And you can look at everything from economics all the way down to quality of education, all the way to the prison industrial complex aspects. And like I said earlier, you know, as a society as a whole, we are still largely segregated.
Right.
And so you can't look, if you were just looking at pure population, where people live, that alone would prove that we're not in a post-racial society.
Right.
You live in, most of us tend to live in, work and be around people who look like us, right? And so to kind of belly back, as I stated earlier, that if you're not whole, you can't help anybody else. And so if I don't have a good sense of self, if I don't know who I am, if I'm not strong and confident in who I am, then anything that anybody gives me, tells me, it can easily tear me down.
Right.
And so that's why statistics prove, I've done numerous studies, for example, of children who are educated just by people who look like them. They don't even have to change the content, right? But just to have somebody standing up there that looks like you offers kids not only a sense of comfort, but it offers them a sense of confidence, because representation matters.
100%.
So you see people that look like you, and then you can aspire to different things. And so it comes part back to, you know, people live within the reality of which they function. And so if you build a reality for people that's really a lot of negativity, that's all they know, then that's how they're going to function. And so when you start changing those dynamics and those conversations where race is concerned for the individual community, it builds up confidence. So now when I know that I can respect you, look at you as a Black woman and respect you as a Black person, simply because I see you as a brother and sister, that what that does is it also allows me the space to accept other people, because now I understand how important it is to accept people for their differences, because I want that same thing. I want people to value and respect me and my humanity as a Black woman. But in order for me to do that, I have to do the same thing with people. And it's only through that lens of really digging deep into myself as a Black person and really kind of growing some confidence in that, then I was able to see the connections that I actually do have with other people. And so it's actually more of a building block. I think that people tend, because it's scary, how we move in society, people tend to look at it as something that, if I focus on my race and my race only, then I'm not being open. But it's actually really the opposite of that. That's how it's always experienced. That's how I talk to it, you know, when I teach kids and things like that.
I think the interesting aspect of that is people are always telling Black Americans and Black Americans especially. I think it's not. I don't think it's exclusive to Black Americans, but I think Black communities that are spawned from the transatlantic slave trade, because people are always trying to tell those people, just assimilate. It's time to move on. It's easy to say that when you can connect to a culture, when you can connect to some kind of origin, and we can't. And that's the thing that about social science that is not like physical science, is that anecdotal evidence matters.
Yeah, very
and
much.
You can't quantify emotions. So I can't explain to you how it feels to say, I don't know where my grandpa's I don't know where my people come from. I don't know.
That hurts.
It does. And it creates something in you that's hard to explain.
An emptiness there.
Right.
And I've had that conversation with people where I say, for example, so I teach history to middle schoolers, right? And my 8th graders were doing civics. And this first part, we're just kind of covering like the American identity, what it is, and like the 5 main groups of people. So when we got to African Americans, the students brought up the fact that out of all the groups, everybody's classified as immigrants, but we were the only group that actually wasn't an immigrant because we didn't come here by choice.
Willingly,
we were the only group. We are the only group in this country that did not come here because we wanted to. We were here. That's
interesting.
Force.
They do classify us as immigrants,
and so we're classified as immigrants, but we're not technically immigrants, and we're also not technically, native to the country.
But we
for the most
immigrated,
part.
just not willfully.
It was not a willful immigration, so you really can't call it, because part of the definition of, how they classify immigrants is the willingness to leave your home to go start a life somewhere else. That was not we were not willing participants in that.
Right.
So we're the only group that's kind of just there in that balance, and that creates that's part of what slavery did. Is it really kind of left holes in people culturally, but that's what also. We talk about this fact, especially when we talk about slavery. People are like, but slavery lasted for a really long time. Mm-hmm. But what makes slavery, that modern context of slavery, so different from any other part of history is this dehumanization process that Europeans added into their slavery. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just about taking people. It was about taking them and disconnecting them from every aspect of who and what they are. Right. So that now you don't, not only do you not know, the goal was to try to create an unwillingness to reconnect to that so that they could be shaped and molded into whatever property that they wanted them to be.
Right.
And so when you remove somebody so far from that,
it's a very unique form of hatred. It's almost it's like diabolically brilliant. I hate to phrase it like that. But
I mean, I would say that there was a lot of effort that went into keeping people of African descent as property. It was a lot of effort.
And I think this is where there's a lot of misrepresentation in what the civil rights movement was, because what we're talking about right now is Black identity.
Right.
And when they love to romanticize Martin Luther King.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, I hate it so much.
He was awesome though.
No. I'm saying.
I know what you're saying, but the way that he, particularly white people, contextualize him today, it's like now they've taken 5 or 6 of his most famous quotes and they've used them to combat any attempt to attack racism.
Yeah, they paint Martin Luther King like he would have said all lives matter. Like that, like that's the kind of shit that kills me. Yeah. They totally forget about the Martin Luther King that pulled out the dictionary definitions of black and how everything black was a negative connotation and everything white was a good connotation. Yeah. And he directly pointed out how that is immersed in our
language.
It's in our lexicon. Yeah. It's in everything that we are as human beings. And so that unraveling needs to take place. So this notion that a generation after he was killed, he would have been like, "We're good. We're nowhere.
Everything's fine,
all
guys.
Good. You don't understand. The water fountain thing, we fixed it. It's all love."
Also ignoring the fact that they killed him.
Yeah. I hate that shit. It was the funniest meme. It was the funniest meme. It was a meme. I saw it on Twitter, and there was this dude. This dude was telling a story. So we were on a train, and we were on a train. We were going back and forth, and we're saying nigga this, nigga that, and he's like, some white lady told us. He said, I wonder if Dr. King would be proud of the language that you guys would be using today. And he's like, I don't know. Your people killed him.
Yeah. I mean, that's irrelevant. That
shit killed me, man.
And a lot of the things that Dr. King has said they're completely taken out of context. I think a lot of what he did is completely taken out of context. And I also think that kind of what has allowed that, and I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing at the time, but what has allowed that is the fact that there were actually a lot of white people who did participate in these movements with him. And so it's easy to then take that and say, but look, guys, they were working together and and that's not, I'm not saying they weren't.
No, they were chastised and beaten and killed too.
But there's so much more, context matters. And so there's so much more to it than just saying just that. And I mean, but we've done that. We've also done that, in a different context to Malcolm X. We've villainized him.
Yeah, that's
we
true.
have made
There should be a
him-
Malcolm X Day, bro.
There actually is. It's just not an official holiday,
Well,
right?
of course.
But
they have a National Pizza Day, but not a National
Malcolm X Day. Yeah, but like we've done that. So we have villainized him. Same thing with the Black Panther Party. We have villainized them.
They have Okay, explain that aspect of it too. I mean, because we can have a 2-hour podcast, bro. But explain that aspect of it too, because the Black Panthers to me are the current day. Well, a part of it. A lot of what they did was just what the NRA is trying to do. The NRA, they want to arm their citizens legally,
right?
And the Black Panthers wanted to do the same thing.
They did that.
Yeah, they did that,
Right.
and they also, but the Black Panthers took it a step further. They wanted to educate the community about a lot of the things, about how to take care of your hair, about how to, a lot of things. So, like, what is the villainization? Like, where does that come from in modern day commentary?
So there's the Black Panther Party. First of all, anybody that disagrees with the Black Panther Party, if you have a child that eats free lunch, you can thank the Black Panther Party. Okay, because
most people that disagree probably don't have a child that eats free lunch.
But you would be surprised. You would be surprised.
You're right.
Right? So there's this quote. Let me read you this quote. I got this as a great documentary about Bloods and Crips. It kind of talks about the way that
Is it the Bastards of the Party?
No, it's called Made in America.
Okay.
And it's a great, and I love this quote because it kind of sums up what you're asking, right? So it says that that's been the one taboo, that Black people and other oppressed people in this country are never to use violence to achieve what it is they want. But this country uses violence whenever it chooses, and then it legitimizes that violence. And that's really what was done with the Black Panther Party. So you have this group of people who said, okay, they're giving the Second Amendment right. We are being terrorized in our communities, and the people who we're supposed to be calling on, that are supposed to be protecting us from that terrorism, are actually a large part of the people that are committing the terrorism. So now we're talking about police brutality, right? Yeah. And so
the justification of American murder is
it's crazy.
We've there's a way to what is that word? I forget when. I'm totally blanking out right now. So when they say it's not euthanize, it's fuck me. It's totally slipping my mind. So like when you go to instead of murders, they call it casualties of war. Euphemism. Fuck me, Jesus Christ. So they use euphemisms in order to justify. So like a casualty of war, that's a murder.
It is.
You murdered an innocent civilian, and they say, oh well, that's just a drawback. So I'm like, there's still that's what I don't understand about the love of America. Like the indoctrination of nationalism is so strong that it'll allow you to justify murder in your head.
Right. And we are always, and then the thing is that ability to justify, it always increases when that person is Black or brown. And so we look at for example, however anybody feels, but like you know what's going on with Judge Kavanaugh. They're trying to kind of get him, into the Supreme Court, get him locked in. But now this woman has came out and she's, said that when they were 17, he sexually assaulted her. And so now there's all this rhetoric from people who want him to be on the Supreme Court, who are saying, but he was only 17. And look at what all these, you're young and you're a kid and you don't know what you're doing. And so we'll justify that. But then we look at like a Trayvon Martin or a Tamir Rice, who is a 10-year-old boy playing outside with a toy gun and gets gunned down by the police. He that's different. Trayvon Martin didn't, for most of the trial, didn't even get classified as a child. They kept calling him a man. That wasn't a man. That was a child who was coming home with Skittles and a can of iced tea. And so we look at.
Did you see?
I saw it.
Oh
I saw it. I'm not even gonna give him that. Yeah, I'm not. But I mean, we have learned to look at, particularly white male, the actions that they take that are painful to other people, and we can justify that.
And this is why I feel like race relations or race identity is important in America. Race identity is important in America because justice is contingent on a juror's bias. Right. And so for centuries in this country,
Yeah.
we have been branded a villain.
Absolutely.
Like, and so those images
Yes.
are still in people's heads.
Yeah.
I still get looks from women in
Absolutely.
elevators that don't know me. Like they're nervous, and they shouldn't be nervous, man. Because statistically, you have a better chance of probably getting struck by lightning than
Right.
getting robbed by me.
Right.
So
Right.
the branding of, I don't know how accurate that is, by the way, but the branding of people of color in this country has been so prevalent.
People don't understand. This is part of so like I said, I teach history, right? And in my US history course, when we get to the Jim Crow era, so right after Reconstruction, we get to the Jim Crow era, and there's literally a paragraph. That's it.
Wow.
And I was
in
like,
the actual
in the book, in the textbook, it's like a paragraph. So I was
from the
Yes,
school board,
yes,
and what
yes,
was
yes. So of course,
wow.
I have the privilege of working at a school that I am allowed to supplement material in a way that is beneficial to the children. That's not beneficial to children to leave Jim Crow as a paragraph.
Right.
Because so much of actually how today's society functions was, kind of took place during that era. And a lot of that propaganda is all it was,
Yep.
really was shaped in that era because it was used as justification for why there should still be this legal separation of white people from black people. And that
That's a great
particularly where black men were concerned, is that they were out to cause damage and destruction to white women. And so, I say this all the time.
That's a great point.
I argue, I've argued with, or not argued necessarily, but I've debated with white women because my philosophy is that white women are actually the upholders of white supremacy, the ideology, right? And so when you look at throughout history, they have kind of piggybacked. Yeah, that their struggle, I'm not going to negate their struggle and their fight for equality with where white men is concerned, but we cannot, lessen the fact that they have actually used their whiteness as a weapon against the black body.
I agree 1,000%.
And there's so much proof of that.
To this day. I mean, I've been a victim. No, but I have. But it really has, and I say this to this because I have baby mothers who are white, right?
Yeah.
And we don't get along. And what has happened in no way, this has actually happened on Father's Day. Actually, on Father's Day, I got the police called on me by one of my baby mothers. She called the police on me for whatever reason, right? The dispute that we had was nowhere near any life threatening or threatening at all, right? But this is to your point. White people and white women weaponize the police
Absolutely.
against people of color all the time.
Absolutely.
And the police came up. He's like, "What's going on, man?" I was like, "This, like, you're being used as a tool right now." I said, "There's nothing going on." I was livid because I'm like, now my kids have to see me interacting with the police, and I have to explain to them that situation. And if I don't explain to them that in the situation the correct way where they can internalize it in a way that they don't they're scared for their father or they see that their father is the threat to them or their mother.
And and that danger lies in the mixing of both. But that's why I say that, white women really uphold this, because we look at, for example, like, what's been going on all over the internet, like every time, somebody white's calling the police, like they're getting hashtagged now, right? But it's good because people need
Barbecue
to
Becky. She was
Poolside Patty.
Poolside Patty was funny.
But like it needs to be understood that the police are not supposed to be something that you call at your convenience. They're not there just for white women who are upset because some black men are barbecuing in what she potentially deems a no barbecue zone that day, right? So,
but even then, like the police should never be called unless there's like a life threatening situation.
But that goes back to what we discussed, even talking about within a jury, right? Like, for example, I'm going to go back to this again. Like in the Trayvon Martin case, the jury was white women. That matters. That matters, right? Because they have been trained, they have been it has been they have been taught that in order for white America to be protected, we must protect the white woman, and the black man particularly is a direct threat to the white woman. And so you'll see, like, I show my kids pictures of old, propaganda posters and book covers that have black men literally depicted as these animals. Stalking white women,
blackface.
And I mean that was the justification really for the KKK's creation, was that there needed to be a protection, because now that these black men are no longer in chains, we cannot corral them. Their animalistic instincts are so like they're going to overpower their humanity because they're not really human anyway, and all they want to do is rape and kill white women, and we got to protect our women. That's literally kind of how these things. So white women have learned to weaponize their whiteness. And when you go back to what we were talking about, like the Judge Kavanaugh situation, the majority of women who are defending him against these accusations are white women. 54% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And this is a beef that I have with feminism, as an ideology, is that so much of it early on was really derived by the fact that white women were upset that black men were given the right to vote before them. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't tolerate it. And
that is kind of wild when you think about it.
And then as they started they started the suffrage movement, right? And which directly was a kind of piggyback off of civil rights stuff. They shunned black women from that movement, and they continue to kind of push this white supremacist narrative where the first white female senator, I'm not gonna quote it exactly, but you can look up the quote where she basically is like, hey, if keeping us safe is lynching these niggers, then lynch 1,000 a day. And she's a white woman who advocates for justice, and social equality for white women, but then was really okay with the destruction of black bodies, black homes. And, one of the things, I went recently to that memorial, the lynching memorial museum that they have in Alabama. And everybody should go if you get a chance. And one of the things that was like, but it's always kind of crazy when you see it in print, was the fact that people, they had a whole, all these names of people from every county really in the deep South that have been lynched. And then you kind of get to the end of it, and it's overwhelming to see the amount of people that were lynched during that time. And then you get to the end, and it's this wall of just kind of like a waterfall, and it says there are thousands and thousands still that are nameless, that still to this day we don't know where they are. We don't have their names. So you imagine leaving out of your house one night or not coming home from work, and, here we are 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, and still nobody knows that grandpa was lynched. Just assumed he didn't come home. That is crazy to me, that and then to not understand how those things have impacted how people live their lives on a daily basis all the way up until today.
A good point to that is I'm constantly trying to convince a lot of my black friends to go to the doctor, to vaccinate their kids, to do things in medicinal purposes that are beneficial to humans. Because granted, we don't live in the 60s and the 50s anymore, so science in the medical field is a little more trustworthy than it was back then. And to your point, there was a lot of experiments carried out on the black community, by doctors, and they were literally used as guinea pigs. So the distrust for medical professionals in the black community is huge. You look at my grandpa right now. He's going through it. He's battling cancer, right? And I'm trying to convince him to take his medicine. I'm trying to convince him to go. And I've had this conversation with my grandpa. He's like, "No, I know, son. I know you trust him, but they killed her." And he's talking about my grandmother who died.
He believes that. Yeah.
He believes that the doctors killed her. Yeah. And this is and he's in California, so that's a very liberal place, right? Think about how these black folks in the South feel.
But then, you couple that, right? And I agree. There's a lot of distrust. But even in today's time, right? There's studies that are being done how that internal bias that we talked about. So like just because that internal bias we live in a more liberal society, or you become a doctor, people assume that those biases leave. They don't. So there's like research that's being done now where doctors have these bias towards Black patients, like Black men and Black women. There's an assumption that you can tolerate pain better than somebody else. So the symptoms that you're bringing to the doctor sometimes are kind of getting washed under the table. Because people, the assumption of what a Black body can do versus a white body is completely different. So those biases, all that propaganda that we talk about, it perpetuates every aspect of our lives today, which is why, to go back to your point, understanding society through a racial lens is so important, because we're not removed from that. We have not done enough work as a society to really heal some of those patches. And the first step of healing it, if we're still telling people in 2018 that you need to get over slavery,
that's insane.
We're not as progressive as a society as we like to believe. And that includes, that's not just I know that we're very politicized in today's time, right? But that's not just a Republican thought. There are a lot of liberals, and it's very common within the Black community for us to give Democrats our vote, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, there's a lot of racism that exists even within the Democratic Party.
Of course.
So what do we as Black people do when the people who were supposed to be representing us, that are supposed to have our interests at heart, number one, don't look like us. Again, representation matters. And then number two, if you don't look like me, if you're not from my neighborhood, how is it that you're able to talk on behalf in Congress, pass laws, and do things that are beneficial to me? We can't. And so things really have to kind of change from a grassroots level. And the first step is is to not just acknowledge the pain and the things, but to hear people's stories. So go back to what you said. It's important. It's important to sit and listen to what a person of color, particularly a Black person, what they've been through, what they experience on a day-to-day basis. Because what we have to bury, the racism that many of us, I don't care if you're, President Obama, LeBron James, I don't care who you are. We internalize racism on a daily basis as Black people in this country. And so imagine for like a LeBron James, him talking about like the time he got nigger painted on outside of his house, how that felt. But imagine the Black person who doesn't have the financial, economics that he does and doesn't have the platform that he does. Imagine how much more they have to internalize.
Well, of course. And this is what I say when I try to convince people, when they try to, because there's so many, like this cat, I mentioned him a lot in my podcast, just merely because he's like a big talking point for the right, especially the white men of the right, is Ben Shapiro. And he has this like saying like, facts don't care about your feelings. And he uses that as if it's almost to weaponize and to to kind of, I forget that I'm fumbling over words now, but like to de-emphasize your experience, right?
It's completely a devaluation of who you are. It's a dehumanization.
But this is why I was telling him, you cannot quantify emotions. This is not mathematics. You cannot quantify that. So for every police officer that has mistreated a person of color because a person of color, like how many times do you think that has been reported to the police station? It doesn't get reported.
So just as much as we as Black people, we normalize that behavior.
Right.
So like it's expected.
But that's why there's a reverberating theme in our community. Is like fuck the police. That was normal hearing that. I remember thinking I don't like the police.
You had experience.
I saw them directly mistreat family members, directly mistreat people I loved, and it was heinous. It was really heinous. Like, but that.
And to go back to what we said earlier, that's terrorism. So you're not allowing people to live a normal everyday life when shredded over them at any given point in time is the fact that you can end their life, whether physically, now whether locking them up behind bars. It's a destruction of the community. You cannot discount that as terrorism, as a terrorism process. You just can't.
And this is kind of what we were talking about this a little earlier in our trip, whereas when you're trying to convey this to somebody, when you're trying to say, and they're like, oh, well, it's not this or it's not that, like, you're really dealing with people who are talking two different languages, right? And this is I see as a huge hurdle in our society today. And it's that they label like kind of postmodernism.
Yeah, and we talked about that, yeah.
So, like, you're of that ilk, whereas you feel like the diaspora has kind of evolved our lexicon has evolved and words can mold and change. And I'm in agreement with that. Whereas I don't think words necessarily have definitions. I think they just have usages. And all words they're just caveats to or the flag carriers to our thoughts and emotions.
Right.
The best way that we can, and language doesn't do the greatest job of it,
Right.
which is why there's so much conflict.
Right. Agree.
So something like racism,
Right.
the word and the term racism in your eyes has evolved.
Yes.
And the issue that I see in today's world is a lot of people don't view racism the same anymore.
Right.
So racism to the everyday average American is a superiority complex because of a race or a gender or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
And in your eyes, the definition has evolved. Now explain to me the evolution of the word and explain to me how you justify a word evolving in a way that changes the narrative of the way the word is used.
Right. So to start, I will just give the definition of racism like as I use it, right? So racism is really any group that has the ability to control the political, social, and economic dynamics of an entire population. That's what I look at as racism now. I think it kind of goes back, right? So you have to understand that America it's really unique. And when we talk about, I'm kind of going to take it real back, but when we talk about American slavery, it is the most interesting and unique dynamics of how slavery has perpetuated itself throughout the world. It's a really unique place. And one of the most unique things about racism in America was that we directly tied in race and laws. We changed age-old way of doing things so that white men could benefit off of the economic gain of black bodies, right? And so when you kind of look at that, early on, racism was really it was a derivative of hate. And so I didn't like somebody because of the color of their skin, and it meant that I can kind of, like we've been talking about, terrorize them, you know, whether it was early slavery, whether we were enslaving those bodies, whether it was Reconstruction, whether we were ensuring that those bodies did not have jobs that we wanted them to have, did not have the right to vote, right? All the way to the civil rights movement, where I don't like you because what you look like, so you can't come into my restaurant. You can't, you know, those things. So really, for we have been taught that racism is just about hate. But what people often leave out is that hate isn't just about hating somebody. It's about the ability to control their lives. So racism has always been about the ability to control black people's lives. And those institutions have grown and they've changed over time. So when slavery ended, Reconstruction happens because white people are pissed that they don't have slaves anymore. And not only was it just we look at them as less than, it was an economic decision. Now, I don't have my financial way of life. I don't have my financial security. So what can I do to make sure that still exists? So we implemented things like the sharecropping. We implemented things, that's the early starts. You see the early starts of the prison industrial complex then. So what white people did.
Policing itself was.
Yes. And so what white people in America did was that once there was no longer the ability to control black people as property, they figured out ways institutionally to control the black body. And it wasn't so if we can sit here today and say that racism is just somebody calling me a nigger, right? Or burning a cross on my lawn, but you can't, but you would look at racism during Reconstruction and look at things like the grandfather clause or a poll tax, which says that people couldn't vote unless they had enough money to pay, right? In a state where you have the right to, or in a country where you have the right to vote, right? So we look at those things, and if you can say that's really hateful, and then not understand how over time all that's done is we've changed the face of those same institutions. So now you have the right to vote, but if I put you in jail and I take away your right to vote, you don't. If you are a black person working in corporate America as a black woman, it's in August. There's a day in August that we celebrate called Black Women Equal Pay Day, where it takes a full year and a half for me as a black woman to make the same amount as a white man. A year and a half to make the same amount as them. That's hateful. And so people because of the sensationalism of things like Dr. King and the civil rights movement, right? We have come to sensationalize racism as only being acts of violence without understanding that violence is not just an attack on you physically. It's if everything I put in your neighborhood, if I flood drugs in your neighborhood, guns into your neighborhood, if every image that I'm giving you is a negative image of who you are, that's violent. Right. Because you are perpetuating people, again, to live up to the reality which they know, and you're keeping that reality really locked in a box.
Right.
And that's why I say that racism, we have to stop looking at it as just a dislike and just a violent act. It's more than just somebody calling you a name. Right. It's the fact that these institutions have not grown over the years in this country to be inclusive of Black people, right? To put us on the same playing field. And I'm not an advocate for doing that. That's something that I think we need to do for ourselves. We need to stop looking to systems and institutions to really do that for us, because it's kind of evident, like history is the best teacher. In 2018, if they're not, why are we still looking to them to do it? Right. Let's do it for ourselves. So I'm a big advocate for do for self, but that's what racism looks like today. Right.
This is why that's well fucking put, actually. Well put. And when you explain it, it helps me understand where you come from and where people that say, that's why you'll hear a big postmodern thought is Black people can't be racist.
Yeah.
Now I totally disagree with that, but that's because we disagree with the definition of racism. But that's what I think where the problem in America is today, is that when we talk to each other, people are talking at each other and not to each other because of the simple fact that a lot of our definitional terminology we just don't agree on.
But a lot of that also has to be, so let's bring race into that as well, right? So like what you told me earlier, which is true. Dr. King, everybody, I've done speeches on how language and how Black people are actually viewed through language, right? It's a really negative context. So when we look at that, the people who have been the creators of that language, and right now we're speaking English, right? That's my first language. I'm not fluent in any other language. That's the language I speak, but I understand that is a colonized language. That's not my original mother tongue, right? And so I have not been able to have control over these definitions. That's why Black in the definition, or in the dictionary, has all these negative connotations, because Black people weren't in control of that. So now you have, in today's time, where people who have been oppressed and disenfranchised.
I can really only think of one Black term that's positive.
Give it to me.
It's in business. Like when you're in the Black, that means.
Oh, that's a good
yeah,
thing.
Yeah, it means you're fluid.
Right, and that's but one. One.
I'm just.
But see, that matters because language matters. 100%. And so you have this place now where people who are oppressed and disenfranchised are saying, "Why did you get to decide what racism is?" White man who wrote the dictionary.
So here's where I have a bit of issue with Black people as a whole, or just people of color as a whole, and where I look to the opposition and I say, okay, that's a solid point. Is this victimhood mentality, right? It's at what point do we say, okay, the history happened, now it's happening, acknowledge it, but let's bring it up in a way that's not. I understand too as well when you voice your concerns publicly, when you voice your concerns about a lot of these social issues, that a lot of it is, a lot of the rhetoric you get back is dismissive, right? You get a lot of dismissive rhetoric back, but part of it is solid criticism when it says when somebody says, like the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. Yeah. I understand what they're saying. They're probably saying it in a little bit more of a dick way, but but the essence of what they're saying is, and what I get out of it is just, it's time to do for self.
I agree.
In a broader way, right? For community, for ourselves. And I'm almost like on some segregation type shit. Buy Black. We always, we love all that. Like, buy Black. I saw Black Panther like 6 times, right? Just because that representation.
That was probably one of my modern day, one of my most favorite representations of blackness. Because
100%.
It was a diaspora blackness
and it was
too.
what's disheartening though is like I watched the movie like recently again because I bought it. It's an okay movie. It's not like a. You know, it was alright.
You're not gonna give me to say it. I still to this day I still love it. I'm not gonna give it away.
Like,
I'm not giving.
I saw it 6 times and I was like, "This is fucking amazing." And then like after the hype died down,
I'm not giving into
this shit was okay, though.
But I'm not giving into it.
Infinity War.
I haven't seen it yet,
It was better.
Okay, are you sure? Look,
I'm just saying.
So we have to understand that it's still a Marvel comic movie.
No,
right?
but this is when I knew. Okay, this is not a post-racist society because I saw that shit 6 times. I took kids to see it. That we packed out a theater, right? I took a whole bunch of kids to see it. Then I went to go see it by myself in different areas, right? Purposefully. And what I saw was hilarious. I saw black people in the audience rooting for Black Panther to the point of it was like, yeah, that's us.
Mm-hmm.
Like they was
beautiful.
they were in
I have a video.
But it's like that's us.
Let me show you this.
Let me finish the point. But it was to the point of it was like almost like
it brings tears to your eyes.
No,
man.
nigga, it was almost like they were kind of trying to point at the white people in the audience, like, yeah, we can do that. And it was really emotional, dog.
But why is that? Because a bad thing?
I didn't say it was bad. I said that's how I know we're not in a post-racist society.
So you're saying in general. Okay,
yeah, we're very divided still. And even this and to that point even more, I went to go saw Infinity War. And Infinity War is like all I don't know.
It's all the Marvel
so people that haven't saw it's like all it's all the Marvel.
I follow Marvels. I just haven't got to that one.
It's all the Marvel classics. So it had Spider-Man, Iron Man, Black Panther, Captain America. So this was the funny part. The black people in the audience, when Wakanda, the drums came on, blew the fuck up.
Yeah.
And the white people started cheering for Captain America.
It became a battle.
It was they were going, but that's what's hilarious about it, and that's the one thing I saw from the white right in this country was when Black Panther came out. They were like, I literally heard this from political heads, talking points. They were like, Wakanda's not a real place. Everybody needs to calm down. I'm like, fam, you have had Krypton since the 50s, G.
Right.
Like, let us have Wakanda. Like we all that's why I wanted to bring black kids to that theater because it was so. Yeah. It was a fucking experience. I was like, I've never seen anybody that looked like me.
That was a cultural moment in this country. And then I don't know, like when we, I was here in Atlanta, so me and brother went to see it.
Right.
We took Saran and everything, and that's my son. And we did the whole night. We dressed up.
Oh yeah.
We wore the garb.
Y'all was Wakanda out.
What? And then at the end of it, we took the picture. And it was more than just a movie.
It was.
It really was this unifying moment.
Right.
And that's what I think was the power of it. But so I have to watch Infinity Wars. But to that,
it was a great movie. Don't get me wrong. I don't got anything against. I think Captain America's whack. I think Batman's whack, but I don't think it has anything to do with their race. I just like
they're whack.
I think they're whack characters. So I was naturally rooting for Black Panther.
Yeah, but
and then hold on, there's this point. No, there was this point in Infinity War where Black Panther and Captain America were running towards the bad guys together. And they were like going almost the same speed. And I'm like, get the fuck out of here.
Black Panther would be beating him in a race right now.
Get the fuck out of here.
That's not realistic at all.
Might be a little racist.
But that's what, that's hilarious. But that's what the kind of the power of representation and what it does.
It really does.
When you're not used to seeing your image reflected, to see it is
in a
positive way. To see it is like, wow.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to hold on to those moments.
Exactly.
I kind of go through that. So like, I watch a show actually on Oprah Network called Queen Sugar. And it's all black cast, direct, you know what I'm saying? But and they really touch on some really deep topics, all kinds of different things. And there's a character on there, her name is Nova, and she's the social justice advocate. She's a writer. And I find myself just when I watch it like, oh my God, that's me. Like that's her, the things she questions, right? Or how she moves through life, or because she does social justice work and advocacy work for Black people, and she's real unapologetically Black. And then she gets into these spaces where people, particularly white people, kind of want to capitalize off of that. And the struggles that she internally goes through with, like, am I selling out my people? Am I, and for me, I remember, like, one day I was watching it and I kind of was crying at some of the things she was going through because it's some of the stuff I'm kind of dealing with as I move forward in my career, trying to start my own business, and I'm working on a book and all these things. And some of the frustrations and things she was presenting on screen, I was like, crying because I was like, that's exactly what I'm kind of struggling with, kind of settling some of those things within my own head. And then at one point I was like, it is so refreshing to see somebody on TV that I like literally can say like, that's me.
Right.
You know, and even the bad, I don't want to say bad, but the struggles that she has, even when she brings them upon herself, it's like, it's refreshing. Right. And so representation is such an important aspect of our lives.
It's a commodity that is not in a world where this is an entertainment driven ecosystem that we live in America. And so in a world where so many characters are become interwoven with societal customs and norms, we're finally, like you said, it's something it's misunderstood how important that shit is.
But then that goes back to like what we were talking about earlier, right? So like the power of having Black people in the classroom, you know, because whether or not that person is teaching me math or they're teaching me science, it's just a comfortable feel to know that at some level there's probably something that you've experienced that I've experienced, and when I get uncomfortable in a classroom, if you are there as my instructor, you can explain that, right? And all those dynamics play into how important representation is all the way up to the White House, you know? And the people who control and dictate our laws, it matters to have people that look like you, but kind of to go back to what
in the micro and the macro, it matters.
And to go back to kind of what you were talking about earlier, like this I often hear, especially doing social justice work, that Black people kind of hold on to this victimhood, right? And that's frustrating for me, in the sense that, first of all, we have classified victims as if we need to be mad at that. People are victims. Right. They are victims of very real, very traumatic things. And especially when we start talking about this generational trauma that America has perpetuated on its
desensitizing
citizens.
people to.
Yeah. So the problem with the community, though, and I don't want to say problem, it's a really ugly way to put it for me, but the thing is that a lot of us don't know how to move past that. Right. Because again, a lot of the representation and in the spaces, one, a lot of us aren't, it is a very elitist attitude to assume that people have access to these things as much as they do, right?
Yeah, I agree.
And having resources, I've kind of harped on this the last couple of years, but having resources doesn't mean shit if you don't know how to use them. I agree with that. So let me give you an example. When I was doing my master's research, I was actually researching food inequality in Black America.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that.
And one of the things that I found when I was studying was when I first started kind of trying to put together a base for people who had researched this before me, there was 2 people in the country from a scholarly perspective, okay, that had peer-reviewed articles that had talked about Black food issues.
That's kind of
just
crazy.
Black people. So what was happening was it's getting lumped in as Black people are kind of getting thrown in that people of color banner, and then they were looking at it as that. But when we're talking about just how Black people are, it's really, really small. So that in and of itself was eye-opening for me, right? I was like, Jesus, like people really aren't talking about this.
2 papers, that's wild.
The other space where Black people are being talked about in food inequality is across the rest of the world. So we're looking, for example, at people in Africa, which perpetuates an ugly narrative in and of itself, that all Africans are poor, and it's America's, you know, we have all these resources, so we really need to be giving to them more because they're still stuck. That's a whole nother podcast we should do one day. But that was frustrating for me. And so when I really started kind of digging into the research and then doing my own research, so many things came out of that. And one of the main things that I got out of it was, I don't care if you have a community and you build them a community garden and you put Whole Foods or not Whole Foods, but, you know, restaurant or places that they could buy quality, healthy food in their neighborhoods. If they have for the past 15 to 20 years only had access to a McDonald's,
they're going to keep going.
They don't know how. You can't take a person and tell them, here's fruits and vegetables, make a salad if they don't know how. You know, I'm being very, very basic, but that's the reality.
No, this is the one thing about the Fruit of Islam, FOI, the Nation of Islam, that I extremely agreed with. And I didn't agree with a lot. The majority
from
of
a religious aspect.
Period. So but they were huge on getting Black people to understand that you need to start changing the way you eat.
Yeah.
because it directly affects
everything of your life.
every single thing. So, but that just in America in general, we don't view diet as an essential part of like mental health.
Right. But part of what I researched and part of what I found is that for Black people who are poor, the access to that is so minimal.
Yeah.
So let me give
People
you...
live in food deserts.
Right. Food deserts are a really real thing. And so for people who don't know what a food desert is, it is, usually measured within a 10 to 15 mile radius. It covers what kind of food is in your area. What do you have access to? So like how far away is a grocery store? What kind of grocery store is it? What is available in the grocery store? And then beyond that, what's your access to that grocery store? And so in a food desert is people have limited access to quality, healthy food. And that limited access includes everything from transportation down to what's being offered. So this kind of goes back to the idea of racism, right? It's really violent to leave people in an area where they don't have access to quality, healthy food. And that their closest access, what I found, particularly here in Atlanta, was that most people where they're shopping are like, they're called we used to call them corner stores growing up. And when you walk in the corners, these really small stores, they're usually owned by that nobody that looks like what that neighborhood is reflective of. And you walk in the corner store, and the first thing that's in a corner store is liquor.
Oh yeah.
Everything,
tobacco.
the person who's collecting the money is behind. You would think it was a bank because they're behind big old plexiglass and they talk to you through like windows big and they slam.
Right.
That's it. So you're already, when somebody walks into that grocery store, you're criminalizing that person whether they know it or not, because you're already treating them as if they're going to do something to you. Then the foods that are there, I have pictures of the foods that were there. It's all processed, quick, unhealthy food. And it's cheap. So if I am a single mother, that I'm working at a job, I don't have, education. I didn't have the privilege of education. I'm working at a job that pays me probably way less than what I should be making. I have maybe one or two kids. That's my access. That's what I'm going to make. So that hamburger helper that I'm going to get from the store is going to last a little while. Even that McDonald's, people talk about, but McDonald's is on every corner in every name. You have closer access and proximity to a McDonald's than most things. And people don't know that. And then when we get into that from a racial aspect, like food, poverty and food, it doesn't just affect Black people, but overwhelmingly Black people are disproportionately affected by it. And one of the interesting things I pulled out of my study was that in proximity to healthy food, actually poor white people are in closer proximity to healthy food because they tend to live closer to wealthy white people than poor Black people, because typically what happens is the conditions in Black neighborhoods are so bad, and that's you can't completely blame Black people for that. So we talk about victimhood, right? They don't own things or the systems that
point.
Create that.
I've never this is because I hear that argument a lot, and I'm because I do a lot of right wing watching. Right, I listen to a lot of.
How you do it.
I do it because. One, I never throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
I learned something. There are solid points here, solid points there, solid points. But I do it mainly to see, okay, how do they view us? What are they saying? What is because they have these. There's a narrative that's being.
It's that same propaganda narrative that we talked about from hundreds of years ago.
1,000%. But what did you just say? I had a point. God damn it.
Talking about food inequality.
Yeah, but specifically.
Oh, the neighborhoods. We victimize Black people for the neighborhoods that they're
that's what's
in.
okay. So, a huge point that I have yet to see that side acknowledge is the fact that, and they'll admit this, they'll say, yes, Black neighborhoods have some of the worst schools.
Absolutely.
Some of the worst schools. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, if education is directly being affected, that is a trickle-down effect to every other problem that you have with Black people. Everything. So if you're sitting here going to say, well, Black people all make up 13% of the population, but have 50% of the crime. Well, okay, like these after-school activities, are they available?
Right.
Like everybody knows idle time is the devil's playground.
Absolutely. And that's not by color. That's just people.
In general. But this is what I'm saying is like they'll admit that people of color's schools are majority bad, but they won't admit the effects that has on a community.
Well, that kind of goes into this narrative that America has as a whole. And it's that, you come to America and you work really hard, then those things will change.
Right.
And I think to a very small extent, that some of that is very true, right? You work hard, things do change. Right. However, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. If you do not have access, or if you are not properly educated about these research, it doesn't mean shit.
Right.
And so these people in these neighborhoods, really, what we're talking about is just a day-to-day survival.
They don't even know.
And
I mean, I didn't. Like, I remember growing up, dog, and none of this shit was nothing actually mattered. The meals that we missed, all of that shit, just I had blinders on because I wanted to do something with my life. But
right.
but like around me, I saw like I didn't know that there was this higher game being talked about and played. I had no clue.
But then you look at people that would use you as an example, right? So like we have come from extreme poverty.
Right.
And within that extreme poverty was a lot of other dynamics that really solely existed because of that poverty. Mm-hmm. From all the way down from, our basic education to what we ate on a daily basis, to our own mental health has been affected by that extreme poverty. Agreed. And so then somebody would look at you and say, somebody in a talking point on that side would say, but you had the mental wherewithal, Arian, to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and see that's the American way. Right. The problem with that is, and this is not at all taking away anything that you've done, because what you have been able to accomplish, and I know personally, it's easy to talk about it. It's different when you live it. Right?
I was a killer.
And but I mean, what you have accomplished is nothing short of amazing, I guess.
No,
it's but you've done amazing things with your life. But the problem is
the probability of me doing that
very small,
was so fucking low.
I
was the 1% of the 1%,
right.
and that's the issue I have with that talking point.
But even if within the context of like myself, right? Like statistically, everything that we went through, I should not have 4 degrees, and be well on my way to owning my own business, to writing my own book. Like, I shouldn't be doing that. Right. I should not be doing that, just from a statistical perspective. So it's more than just being able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. There has to be a support system in place.
1,000%.
And so for you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think football was your kind of your support system that kind of it added. Well, I'm saying it gave you it kept you at the space to be able to stay afloat above that.
I think the ideology of financial freedom was my support system,
and that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Whatever it was, there was something. For lack of a better word, some hope to cling to, to say, I'm going to achieve for better. So then this gets into, again, representation and different types of, these different types of things. That it's important for young Black children to see these Black people that have been successful, because we have made it. But there shouldn't be one Black billionaire. Mm-hmm. That's still an issue when you compare it to the white male billionaires, right? So we're so taking an Oprah or some, a LeBron James and saying, but see, they did it, it's so small compared when you have to take those everyday, day-to-day tasks. And not everybody has been able or taught or knows how to capitalize on that one moment that they might have that'll kind of give them another directive in life. It becomes about survival. Yeah. And so you can't attack people for survival. So if I want to change the way that Black people, how successful they are, what I've learned is to educate them, and then to change their reality.
Right.
That's the only way that you could do it. And I don't say educate Black people in the sense that Black people don't understand what their problems are. Black people know what their problems are. There needs to be resources filtered in,
I'd argue that they don't.
Well, what we do as people who are on the other side, and when I say the other side, we're not like directly immersed into like whatever that oppressive state is anymore. Right. So like, for example, for poverty, it's really easy for somebody to go into a neighborhood, look at a poor neighborhood and be like, this is what they need to be successful. When oftentimes, and I've done this and I've seen this in research, is that if you go to the people and you say, what do you need? What is going to change? What do you want to change in your neighborhood? They know. The problem is that most of them just don't have the platform, the access, or the resources to be able to create those changes. And so the assumption is that they don't know.
What do you think about this aspect of it, though? Because one of my best friends is from Uganda, Humble. And they grew up in a different kind of poverty than we grew up.
Very different.
They grew up in third world poverty where.
Well, there's some places in America that are.
Well, I understand. I'm talking about me and you.
Right.
I mean, we definitely had days without water as well. But
no, you're saying constant.
Yeah. So to the point of, but what I noticed about his perspective of life, and I'm pretty sure it's a subjective perspective to each individual, African tribe around his native country, was that they had an overwhelming sense of happiness in family, right? I'm wondering, because I think how you label and how you define success has everything to do with your overall well-being.
Absolutely.
And so I think a lot of what's happened in America is the romanticizing of the white picket fence and the 2.5 kids, and the romanticizing of this financial mountaintop that everybody's getting on. So it's almost as if the American economy keeps you in this perpetual state of it's not enough.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can kind of inject a little bit of that native anti-materialism into our neighborhoods. Whereas if you talk to kids, like, I don't know how many schools I've been to, and they all want to be ball players or rappers.
I teach at a school. That's what they do.
And they all. But I think it's more than just financial freedom. I think they are screaming for some kind of like, I'm not enough, some kind of attention.
But that's because for Black people, what we see that has been successful in this country has been in the entertainment industry.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about the aspect of what success even is.
Right. But we as a whole, so this goes back to that definition of racism, right? We as a whole don't define what success is. It is defined for us. And that's the country as a whole.
I would agree.
Success is defined by how much money you have,
right,
how much money you make every year, and what kind of things you have that attribute to that status. And that's not a definition at us. So then what happens is it's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome that we have. And then you have people that are really trying to mimic their oppressors. So you have wealthy white, particularly men, who have been wealthy and white and largely Christian for the majority of, for all of what this country has been in existence. What other examples do we have? Well, now for Black people, the only other ideology that has been, or the only other image that has been given to us of success is wealthy entertainers. So yeah, it's not a shocker that kids grow up and the only thing they can define success by is to be an athlete. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, because even within the classroom, I talk about you a lot in the classroom because I use you as an example of, it doesn't matter if you play sports, you still need things after. And it doesn't, and I
almost hate the fact that I was an athlete.
That's crazy.
I almost resent it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so crazy. I need to hear why. I really do.
Because I wasted, I think, the prime of my years. I don't say wasted because the trade-off was enormous. But I spent a lot of the prime of my years, and I'm still in my prime. I'm 31, 32. That shit, well, that motherfucking thing is ticking. But I wasted the majority of my youth, my prime youth, doing something that, as an 80-year-old man, I'm not gonna be proud of. I'm not proud of it now. I don't look back at my career and like, I'm proud of what it took to accomplish the goal that I set out to accomplish. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actual body of work. I'm not proud of the 6,000 or whatever yards I had. I'm not proud of the 50+ touchdowns. I don't give a shit about that. I honestly don't care. I actually think it's actually detrimental to the society, if you want to break it down. I think I'm just entertainment, and I take people away from their problems for 3 hours every Sunday.
But you shouldn't, I don't mean to cut you off, but I personally feel like you shouldn't belittle that, in the sense that
I just don't think it's I don't think it's a I don't think it's an admirable feat. I don't think you're going to convince me otherwise. You're more than welcome to.
It's not I guess it's to say it's not to try to convince you, right? But for me, first of all, I was always very proud of you. Not just because you were a football player. You've been playing football your whole life, right? And really prior up until you retired and all this Kaepernick stuff.
Right.
I watched football religiously. Like football was such a big part of our lives growing up. And I like football because you can kind of it is relatable to everyday life. And so there are terminologies and things that I can use, and team sports, they do teach kids things.
I would agree.
So I do think that they're really, really important.
I would agree.
And I don't think you can discount making people feel good. I don't think that should ever. I think we do place as a society. I will say this, that I think we do place an overwhelming amount of emphasis on entertainers.
Right.
But society is largely driven by Black culture.
Oh.
And so now, that's where the success.
I'm talking about world too.
Worldwide, yes. Yeah. But so right now, that's where the success is. Right. And I really do think that's a large part of why that emphasis is there. Right. However,
that's kind of my point.
But I don't think you can take away from that.
Well,
I think we as a people need to control those images more. I think we as a people need to maybe how we kind of trickle that back down into positive aspects of the neighborhood needs to be conversation. But you've literally made people smile.
I mean, yeah.
I just don't think it's a small feat.
In that essence, in that aspect, I understand what you're saying, and it's not like I'm not. Okay, there is no other way to say it other than just say I'm devaluing the work that I put in, because I understand what I did, but I just don't deem my profession as valuable. I don't. It's because it's my worldview. My worldview.
You
currently.
Were in it.
I don't look at athlete like even music. I put out an album. I don't look at that. Well, that's actually a little different. But like to the point is like when that whole Kanye West debacle took off, right? I argue with people constantly of like, yo, just hear the cat out. And the reason why people are so passionate about it is because they put Kanye on his pedestal of yo, he represents blackness. He represents black in art. But he never did. He said it constantly. He said, I don't read books. Why am I gonna get my political views or hang my political hat or try to find representation from a man who doesn't read books?
Right.
That's fucking ridiculous.
But this kind of goes back to understanding the importance of education and education. So I'm a really big proponent of education, but it's not in a go to school, sit in the classroom, only learn type of things. Education needs to be holistic. And so you have to have a well-balanced person. So you have to have somebody that can take a Kanye, listen to a Kanye, and then be able to decipher like, well, let me go look that up for myself.
Well, that's why I didn't have a super problem with what he said. I'm like, yo, I think
you're talking about the slavery comment.
Yeah, I think he's harmless. I think what he was doing was trying in an odd way to one, sell his upcoming projects, but two, say, listen, like we need to come together. Like it's a recurring theme in his music.
So, but I think the problem.
But it's kind of off topic. The point was this: as an entertainer, I understand the smoke and mirrors behind it. And so a lot of the product people pull out is not necessarily generated for genuine content. A lot of it is cultivated for profit, right? And so there came a time in my career, and I argue with people on Twitter about this all the time, because I remember that whole Vontae Davis thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Vontae Davis, for people that don't know, he retired mid-game, and people are killing him, saying he's a quitter and this and that and yada, yada, yada. It's because we have romanticized this idea of an athlete being this hardened warrior gladiator that's supposed to love the game with all he has and his teammates, and that's the biggest crock of shit ever. When in reality, it's a bunch of niggas who grew up broke and they trying to feed their families. Yeah. So I was like, yo, retire when you want, because and I made this argument. I'm like, these fuckers are so passionate about it that I never hear the same rhetoric from ex-players that are defaming Vontae. I never hear the same rhetoric of like, yo, when they cut players, I've seen players.
What about when you keep people out of games, like the higher ups?
That's a little bit of a false of equivalence, but I've seen cats get sat mid game, right? That people are outraged about that because of contract incentives that they're about to hit. I've seen that. I've never heard cats get pissed off about that. So the issue is this: we view all of these cats as these diehard gladiators when the reality is it's fucking entertainment and this is a business.
Right.
And that's where I sit with it. It's just a business. It's just something I did and it's something that I loved to do, but I'm not in love with it. And that what I do understand is that shit is not gonna affect anybody to the point of growth. And that's where I'm at with it. I think something like the reason why I got super into science was Neil deGrasse Tyson. Understanding
awesome.
like his before the Cosmos series hit, he had another one that was really small, but I fell in love with, and he starts explaining science in this really elegant way, and in a man that looked like me. That shit was important, right. And I never really got into science like that before that. And so things like that is what drives society. In my utopia, I say it all the time. My perfect society is artists and scientists. That is a perfect society to me. A place where scientists can cultivate in their ingenuity and their technology to make it so water is available for every mouth on this planet, food is available for every mouth, and there's a home for every person on this planet. That way people can just spend their time in their life creating and innovating. And that is the society I want to believe in. And that's why I feel like what I did for a living didn't have any value, because it didn't fulfill me. I was merely filling a quota of trying to get rich.
But that's really understandable. And actually, I've never really heard you say that, so that's kind of crazy. But,
right, yeah.
But like, I think that for me, that kind of comes back to the devaluing that we put on society and on different roles in society, and we place like the doctor in society is just as important as the trash man, but we don't view their importance the same. And so
I think that's the economic system we occupy.
And that's a large part of it.
But it can't be, though.
I hear you. But I think, so again.
It's why teachers are underpaid.
We are so underpaid.
It's because the 30,000th teacher still adds value in this country, right? Yeah. You're still adding value. You're teaching kids. The 30,000th football player isn't on an NFL roster. So your income is directly correlated with how rare you are. That is the heart of capitalism.
Yes, it is.
So until that system is changed, then the issue I have with criticism to capitalism is there isn't a better system currently, and we don't know of one. I can't think of one.
I think that the problem with capitalism is that the people who are, for lack of a better term, the devalued part of society tend to be people of color, right? And
I would agree.
And our society in America was literally built in a capitalist system where Black bodies were the property.
I agree.
And so there has to be, again, kind of going to your point, there has to be more emphasis placed on the importance of all aspects of the machine, for lack of a better word. So, for example,
there's so many old white people in...
There is, but
in power right now.
There is, but
people don't see it like that.
But there has to, and there will. There has to be a change in those things, and so this is what I tell you. So when I do a lot of the work that I've done, really, like I kind of told you earlier, took place in my college years, undergrad and grad school, where I was able to directly affect age-old systems of white supremacy because I refused to lower my stance or take a different stance, but I was open to negotiation. So I understood that at this point, it needs to be all about what is the best and what is most beneficial for the Black community. And then at some stages, you need to be inclusive and, include other oppressed groups. And then you kind of need to know when, okay, we still need to bring the focus back here. That was an example. But one of the things that we did, for example, in my grad school, we pushed and we worked hard to have them add in a position that had been that students had been asking for 20 years, and nobody was successful in doing it. And when we were able to get that position in, it changed the dynamics up top. They had no choice but to get rid of some people that weren't doing justice to the school.
Wow.
And so people lost their jobs, and that's, but they weren't doing the right things with those jobs. The people who were in charge didn't look like the school that was being represented. And so,
it's usually the case in this country, man.
yeah. And so that grassroots kind of constant movement and constant pushing and not backing down. One of the things that I would tell people who would come and say, Christina, I really want to get involved, but I don't know how. One of the things I constantly get is, I don't talk like you. Like, I'm not as passionate as you when you talk about these issues. I'm not as, my passion doesn't show, or I'm not as confident about, like, people constantly tell me, like, I wish I held the confidence that you did when you talk about these issues. That's how I talk. That doesn't have to be your role. That doesn't have to be how you affect change, right? So
Find
back
your
to the
niche.
point is, like, for you, I understand that, and I know you and personally, so I kind of know how you move. But like, finding that might not have been your niche, but I know kids who are inspired by what you did, who want to do better in their lives, who are or even when in the classroom when I'm talking about that, like, your brother used to play football, yeah, this is what he did, and then you see the subtle change in the body language, the putting the head down in the book and let me. That's changed
That's
to
dope.
me,
That's
and so that's why I say I talk about you in the classroom all the time, because I get how kids are. But I always tell kids, it can't just be one thing. Find what you're good at. If it's football, then go be the best damn football player you could be. But, broaden yourself up to everything. Look at everything. Be everything.
When you frame it like that, I guess it does help.
You have a role. Everybody has a role.
Well, it helps
to play.
from this aspect, because I think the double-edged sword of how I live in a bubble, right? I live in a bubble, and that has been my catapult to garnering any kind of success and notoriety I've had, is because I put blinders on, and I'm like, I don't care what people say or think or feel or whatever. And so in my exodus out of football, I occupy the same mind state. So like right now I'm currently in a bubble, and I have different goals and different life paths. And so the fields I'm trying to break into and the things that I'm trying to do don't give a flying fuck about my so that's how I view it. It's like I didn't have any impact, but like it's because I live in the bubble.
Right.
I live in the bubble, and I can't not live in that bubble because that's who I am.
But think about
when
just
you
the
frame it
impact,
like that, it
all
makes
the
sense.
kids you took to see, for example, that's
Right.
impact, and you would not have been able to do that without football. And so that's why I said we as a society tend to devalue the little things. And to go back to your point, you were talking about happiness and the root in that's a lot of the problems with the communities is they're not happy.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot to be happy about when everything around you is so, dull and drum and violent and awful.
Agree, but also I think we have to the point we kind of made earlier, was I think we have to redefine what it means to be successful.
Definitely.
Because a lot of the times I think we're swinging at shadows.
We are. We have to change. I often use this kind of analogy as, people will talk about people who are debating me on like racism, right? They'll always say, well, like it's statistically, they're saying that in 25 years, like white people aren't even going to be the majority, right? So racism isn't going to exist anymore. It's such a falsehood, because what has been driving this world for the last better part of about 2,000 years has been a white supremacist ideology, where, again, the people who have been in control and who have been powerful have been white male Christians. And they have been the ones that have been setting the laws, writing the rules, dictating everything that affects people's livelihood. And so if you don't change what that reality looks like, the next group that's going to come in is going to operate off of that same ideology, where violence begets you power, and power is directly correlated to money. So there has to be a change in how we view, not just an individual change. There has to be a change in the community. That's why I'm such a big, like, when I talk to my kids know, like, I'm unapologetically Black, but I tell them things all the time. If you don't value the person sitting right next to you, if you don't see that face as important, then it doesn't matter how successful you are when you look up and you're the only one of you standing there.
Still nigga.
it won't matter. So you have to, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier. When we go to counseling, you're told, learn to love and value yourself and you'll be the best asset you can to people. But when we apply that to a community, so when I say I'm unapologetically Black and I'm going to focus on Black people and teaching them to love and value themselves, people are like, oh, you're racist.
1,000%.
You're racist.
Black love does not mean white hate, fam.
But the part of it is in reality, if you kind of were hearing what I'm saying, yes, I talk about the institutions and the history and the things that have created that, because I am a believer that you cannot change something if you don't understand why it functions the way it does. So those things matter. But what I always leave my kids with, because my kids will get, we'll learn these things in class. We'll have these conversations. They'll get very upset. And there will be one or two that'll be like, I don't understand white people. Why would they do this? And what I will always tell them is that if you walk out my room and the only thing that is in your head is anger at white people, then I have failed you and you're not doing what you're supposed to do to create change. It's not about them. We need to understand what they've done. We need to understand how it impacts your life. Then the next step is to understand how you can create, what are you going to do? What's your role in creating change? And that's where you kind of relieve that victimhood that we talk about, is you give people the power to then control what their destiny looks like. If I have taken a kid and I have pumped them so full of Black love, and then they go out into society and the boss or the teacher or somebody in whatever field of study that they choose to go to says something or does something that belittles and dehumanizes them for no other reason than their skin color, they now have the confidence to say, no, fam, you can't do that to me.
They have the tools.
And I have a student, matter of fact, he just came back to me like 2 weeks ago, and he said, Ms. Foster, I actually had to use some of the things that you told me in class. He said, because I had a teacher that I just felt it. I was the only Black kid in the class. He said, and I felt that she was picking on me and attacking me. He said, and I remember some of the things you would tell me. And he took that, he had the vocabulary that he was able to sit and have a conversation with her. Because that's another thing. People always think that combating racism means I'm violent. Sometimes at some point that may have to be the case, but it really is about conversation. People can be divided. That's how I've created change, and I've done a lot of it, right? And he said, Ms. Foster, I sat with her, and I was able to express to her what she was doing, how it made me feel, and she didn't even realize what she was doing. And that changed not only for him, it changed her. So now she has to consciously look at her biases, and that's why I teach kids, and I'm unapologetic about it. Love your Black self. Yeah. Be proud of it. Look up and learn about all the amazing people that have contributed to society. Love the entertainer as much as you love your trash man, because they are all valuable in you being a success, in you being who you are. So that's kind of what I talk to the kids. And understand these things. You can be mad about them. You can be frustrated. When I do my lynching lesson with my kids, I tell them before and after the lesson, you should not walk out of this room and be okay with seeing pictures of Black bodies being hung and hearing the stories of why. No Black body dangling from a tree. There's not a lot that you could convince me that somebody ever deserved that type of ending. And so you can be upset. You should be upset. You should be angry. But if you sit in that, that's where the problem lies. And so we have different levels where we're not teaching the community, one, how to love and value themselves, and more important, see the value in each other. And then two, how to take that and move past the anger. You should be angry. You should not be okay with these things. But then what am I going to do to fix it? That becomes the central question. And then that lesson doesn't have to just apply to Black people. That's a lesson that you can apply to anything, everything of your life. Things are going to happen in your life that are going to frustrate you and upset you. And I have no problem with sitting in that for a minute, feeling it and understanding and then moving past it.
Right.
That's
a fucking beautiful soliloquy to end on, my nigga. I don't have nothing to add to that.
Look at that.
No, for sure. I mean, we definitely probably need to have we have a part two, because I mean, there's definitely aspects of your personality I wanted to dive into, but you can only hold people's attention for so long before.
I know. I'm a teacher. I know.
Yeah, man. So probably people already clicked off and watching horse videos or something.
I hope not. Horse videos?
Never mind. Whatever's on your log, whatever. But I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you coming through. I haven't probably told you enough, but I'll just do it publicly. I'm very proud of the human being that you became. I know we get into it a lot, but you've accomplished so much, and you do a lot to help out people in a broad sense and on a micro level. And that shit is what's important. Actually, is getting kids to understand and love themselves, because shit, I was a victim of that. We all were. We all had to find out how to do it by ourselves. And so for that, I thank you. And I'm extremely proud of you.
Thank you. I thank you for having me.
No, for sure, man. Right. But you know how we end the podcast, everybody.
I do.
Yeah, man. So we're going to try to get my guy Jim on. So if you could just holler at your boy for me.
All right. So I know Jim Carrey don't know me, but listen, Jim Carrey. You are by far one of the funniest and most intelligent minds that I've actually ever come across. And I think that the conversation that you could bring and open to people's eyes would be so dynamic. But more importantly, the chemistry that I believe that you and my brother would have would be something that cannot be matched. So bring yourself and come to this podcast. You are not going to be disappointed. My man.
I think my man will definitely.
He's going to be here.
Hopefully, man.
He's going to be here.
I'm going to speak it into that. Well, you're religious. Pray for me. Woo! We didn't even touch that, and we won't. You know what I mean? We appreciate you coming on, man. Y'all check out. Let me know if you like the Pod God. I might run with that. That's kind of hot.
Give me one.
Let me know. All right, man.